Fighting Blindness Canada's Viewpoint is a virtual education series that brings you the latest in vision research presented by health experts from across Canada. The webinar you're about to watch is a recording. To learn more about the research we fund and upcoming webinars and events, please visit our website at fightingblindness.ca. This Viewpoint webinar is proudly presented by Bayer and supported by Abbvie, Apellis, Beacon Therapeutics, Janssen, MeriaGTx, Novartis and Roche. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and share your thoughts with us in the comment section below. All right, so we're going to get started with our final closing panel of the day. I'm very excited to be up on stage with these three individuals. We're going to be talking about gene therapy and more specifically Luxturna and the Luxturna experience here in Canada. It's been a big year for Luxturna in Canada, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So I think many of you who've been to other sessions today, the breakout downstairs, are familiar with Dr. Cynthia Qian, who is an associate professor at the Department of Ophthalmology at the University of Montreal. We're also joined by Dr. Ajoy Vincent, who works here in Toronto at a hospital for sick children with Elise Aon, and is the staff physician in eye genetics and heads the electrophysiology unit. And then at the very end is Jack McCormick, who is a certified human resources professional. He works at a large tech company as an HR manager and specializes in building inclusive environments. And Jack and I know each other through the Young Leaders Program, where he is a past co-chair and very active participant over the years. And he has also received many accolades for his work in human resources, but also through volunteerism. So thank you to all three of you for being here today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. So why don't we just start out really broadly to set the stage about gene therapy. So Dr. Qian, can you tell us what is gene therapy and how does it work?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all again and to be amongst these illustrious panelists, and nice to continue the conversation and also hear from my peers. So just to get things started, gene therapy is the concept of correcting or being able to, in this case for ocular disease, of either improving or changing the basically the genetic mutation that's at fault, and you can do it through many different ways. And the one that we're going to be discussing, which is Luxturna, involves adding a corrective copy of the gene, which is delivered through a viral vector, which will then be able to go on to the subsequent steps of that process and produce the correct protein, which is needed to have the visual cycle continue its regular pathway. So basically, in a way, bypassing either through adding a missing gene product, or there are other ways, other methods where you can also suppress harmful genes, etc. So I think just as a general concept, it's a good starting point, and I'd like to hear from my peers.
So Dr. Vincent, can you tell us specifically then what is Luxturna and what does it specifically treat?
Yeah, so again, thank you for having me. It's good to be amongst peers and talking things that we really love to do. So Luxturna is actually a gene replacement therapy for a specific type of inherited retinal dystrophy. Let's call it IRD for short. So IRD, if you take, there are different types of IRD, and one specific IRD is due to mutations or changes in a gene called RPE65. So Luxturna is specifically a gene replacement therapy for patients who have RPE65 mutations related disease. So, most oftentimes these patients either have disease from when they are children, so they carry a diagnosis of LCA or Leber congenital amaurosis, or some of them have disease manifestations slightly later, in which case they present with what we call as RP or retinitis pigmentosa. be it LCA or RP, only individuals who have mutations in RPE65 gene is eligible for treatment with Luxturna. The second part of the question is, how does it work? So, what it is, a virus vector. So within a vector, there is millions of copies of the correct copy of RPE65. So that is reconstituted into a small amount, a few microliters. And surgeons like Dr. Qian actually does surgery inside the eye to put this Luxturna product underneath the retina. And what happens next is this solution that is put underneath is then integrated into the retina, and then this gene naturally needs to help in the recycling of vitamin A. And when the new copies of the gene actually reach the retina and gets integrated to the retina of affected patients are able to process vitamin A again efficiently. So that is how it works.
Thank you. So, Jack, so you do have this particular mutation, the RPE65. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of your personal experience when you were first diagnosed, and what was your vision like before Luxturna?
Yeah, so LCA is a degenerative condition, meaning that it gets worse over time. And so as a child, I had comparatively good vision. The biggest impact for me was not being able to see in the dark. And I was diagnosed initially with cone rod dystrophy because the genetic testing just wasn't there yet, and they weren't able to identify which genetic gene caused my visual impairment. And so over time, I started to notice decreases in my vision. The first thing I noticed was I was in a math class looking at a large print textbook, and I couldn't read the exponents in the math textbook anymore. And so I went to my doctor at the time, and over several steps, eventually got referred to the wonderful people at Sick Kids, Dr. Vincent being one of my treating physicians there, who recommended that I undergo gene testing, where I was eventually diagnosed with LCA with the RPE65 mutation.
Thanks, Jack. So we'll come back to the next steps for that in a minute. But so this gene therapy, Luxturna, had been approved in the U.S. What year? Does anyone remember? 17. So it's been a while, and it had not yet been approved in Canada. So it was approved by Health Canada in 2020, and this year we've started now to have it publicly funded in provinces, which was a whole other approval process. So there's a lot of steps, and there's been a lot of challenges along the way. Yes, exactly. It's very exciting. And so I was hoping that Dr. Qian and Dr. Vincent, you could talk about what the experience of getting Luxturna approved in each of your provinces was like, and sort of what challenges you faced in that arduous, long process.
Sure, I'll maybe get started, and Dr. Vincent will join in. But I think for us, well, we speak very often because we're part of a board that tries to push through to get these treatments approved and covered as quickly as possible for all Canadian patients. So all those dates are really seared into our minds. So October 15th, 2020 is when it was approved by Health Canada. And to get to our patients, and actually I felt the timing was perfect because so Ontario, as witness, were the first, with Jack being the first patient being treated, but the coverage was not yet approved on a provincial level. So really kudos to be able to do that. And I think that was something that was, prior to getting the coverage, was really getting the other physicians from the other provinces excited, knowing that it's possible and pushing for our patients and that it was coming. And in Quebec, funnily enough, Quebec September 28th, so almost exactly a year ago, 2022, was the first province to officially approve to have it on the formulary, meaning that the provincial government and the health ministry was willing to cover the cost of this drug and this novel treatment for patients. And that was exactly a year ago, and we've since had our first patient undergo that process. But I feel like every step of the process is a group sort of discussion about how to surmount these roadblocks, if you will, because as much as we're willing to and wanting to, and the patients are there, there's a lot of these legislative steps that we have to go through, which, sometimes as you hear patients here, well, it's approved in the US for over 6 years, how come it's not coming? And these are the things in the behind the scenes that I think that have to keep moving forward and that we work together to strive to surmount.
Yeah, I mean, if we backtrack a bit, so it was approved in the US in 2017. And if you look at the timelines, Novartis, the parent company, actually filed for Health Canada approval in November of 2019. So when that happens, usually the next step is there are two organizations. So I mean, I just want to go over why it took this amount of time for it to reach to each one who has the disease. So there are two organizations. One is called CADTH, which is the Canadian Association for Drugs and Technology in Health. And the second is the Quebec equivalent, which is called INES. And what they do is, when they receive the package which has all the indications and all the product information, they solicit experts. So they solicit physicians who have expertise, they solicit surgeons who have expertise, they solicit health economic people who have expertise. And the idea is that they would get feedback, multiple rounds of feedback from all these experts. So from a doctor, they would want, what do you think? Do you think it is safe to be given to the patients in Canada? Or which age group does these patients belong to? To a health economist, it can be something like, how does it make sense? Is close to $500,000 Canadian for each eye, what difference does it make to a patient's eye or Jack's eye? So we have all this group of professionals have to sit around and provide a report, which is then assimilated by CADTH and INES, and they have their board and their approval process, and they approved in October, 2020. And subsequently, Health Canada released the guidelines, which patients we can treat and which patients are eligible. Once the guidelines are out, the next step was there is something called as PCPA, which is Pan-Canadian Association of something to the tune. I'm forgetting the expansion now. So Luxturna was one of a kind of a medicine because there was no prototype like this drug available in Canada before. Why do we say that? So if a medicine is approved, there must be a route for patients to receive it. So it can be either through a doctor writing a prescription and patient going and getting it from a pharmacy, or in some instances, it can be hospital administered where the patient gets into the ward and the nursing staff would inject it. But Luxturna was the first product where it has to be administered within a surgery or through a surgery into the patient's body. So there was no previous mechanism to actually administer such a drug in such a way. So a lot of time has passed before all the different provinces and hospitals and provincial health ministries could figure out a mechanism by which each province would fund this or would provide this medicine. So after November 2020, it took about 14 months before different provinces had some guidelines before the negotiation started. Mind you, COVID also did not help. So there was a period where nothing moved forward. And PCPA gets applications from regarding multiple medicines. So they have to prioritize which one is more important or which one should be taken next. That is where, all patient advocates, organizations like FPC and physicians, there were newspaper articles that came in trying to push the government and PCPA to take this up. So after that, about 6 months later, so this is about 22 months after the approval by Health Canada, Quebec was the first province to come up with an approval. And following that, it is easy. We cry more at other provinces, we put more pressure, and within 6 months, most provinces did have a formal approval process. So in total, it took about, I want to say, close to 3 years to get it to the first approved province. But I would say that there were few uniqueness to this problem. One was this is one of a kind. So we are hoping that the next gene therapy for eye would be more faster. Second is, let us hope that there is no COVID or COVID's brothers or sisters when the next gene therapy is approved. So I just, all this to put in perspective is that it's a very complex process. Yes, it could be done sooner, but there is some rigor to it so that it can be administered in a way that is, beneficial and safe. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great explanation of that process. So hearing all of that, Jack, can you describe sort of your journey from first learning about Luxturna to then being the first patient in Canada to actually receive the treatment?
Yeah, that's a long story that I'll try and be as brief as I can be about. I think it's helpful for me to start with my diagnosis. So, as I said, I was in my late teens when I first received the LCA RP65 diagnosis. And as I was going through the diagnosis process, I was doing a lot of research on what treatments were out there, what clinical trials were available. And I was familiar with Luxturna, and I kind of knew that my vision was getting worse. I knew that it was a bit of a long shot that any treatments would ever impact my life, but I still was hopeful that there might be something down the road. And so I remember the day when I got the phone call from my genetic counselor at Sick Kids to tell me about the diagnosis and the test results coming back. And, up until that point, I was kind of in denial that my vision was getting worse. I kind of was hopeful that it would still, stabilize. And so we got the phone call saying, you have LCA. I knew exactly what that meant. Huge amount of emotion, but I heard, okay, it's RP65. And at the time, there was a fair, and still is, quite a bit of research in this space. So I kind of had this hope, okay, maybe there's something that could help me. But at the same time, I knew that I needed to continue living my life. There's lots of goals that I wanted to work towards, and, losing the rest of my vision wasn't going to change that. And so I made decisions about, getting a guide dog because I was about to move away to university and hated using a cane and knew I would need to use a cane on a busy university campus. I learned Braille, things like that. And so fast forward to seeing Luxturna get approved in the US and my vision getting worse. Every time I went to see Dr. Vince and every time I went to go see the team at Sick Kids, it was, okay, Jack, your vision's a little bit worse. Here's sort of the trajectory we're seeing. And me thinking, is it going to be too late? Because of the very long administrative process that Dr. Vincent just described. Yes, we absolutely need to have checks and balances in place, but it was very challenging for me to see my vision literally getting worse and waiting for bureaucratic processes. because we knew the treatment worked. We knew that there was a limited window of time where I would be still a candidate for the treatment. And so it was approved in Ontario, but not funded in Ontario yet. So I did everything I could to find funding. And I won't go into the details of the exact source of funding I was able to obtain, but I was able to find funding for the treatment before the province would cover it. And the lesson I learned from that was that no is never the answer until you hear it about 50 times. And if you hear it, you need to keep saying, who can I escalate this to? And I'm very thankful that I did, because I was able to get the treatment about a year ahead of the time I otherwise would have. And I don't know if the treatment would have been as effective or if I even would have been a candidate if I waited that time.
Thanks, Jack. I'm going to come back in a minute. I want to hear more about your experience with Luxturna, but Dr. Qian and Dr. Vincent, you both play very different sort of roles in the treatment of patients with gene therapy, so surgical and both medical retina. So can you describe how you work with patients to get the treatment and the roles that you play in that process?
Well, I wish Dr. Vincent was in Quebec, and then I can have him close by to work closely. Maybe you want to start. And
So we do the beginning and the end, and doctors like Qian and our team, Dr. Curtis and Dr. Mooney and Dr. Flavio, they do the interesting bit. So we do the dull, dirty work, and they do the best work. But we work as a team. So what we do, what is most important, jokes apart, is to actually realize that the first thing is to manage patient expectations. So you know that if there is a medication, it can be a cure, it can be a treatment, it can be slowing the progression, or it may not have an effect. So Luxturna provides, there is ample data to say that it improves night vision and it improves mobility at night, but it need not improve distance vision. So it is very important that, when we spoke to Jack, I remember my colleague Dr. Yon and myself in a deep conversation, because Jack was our first patient, to really manage what his expectations were and what we can expect and what the outcome measures could be. So funny enough, if you ask children, even young patients, they would have their expectations. So it is really important to manage expectations. So we try our best to tell very clearly, like night vision and visual field are the two most important criteria where you can expect improvements. This is not a cure. So we prepare the patient, and we work to make the drug become available, and then the surgery happens. The second part, which is done as a teamwork, is we are able to inject about 0.3 milliliters or 300 microliters. From our side, we need to decide where this should be injected. So we have created a team in Toronto with our both specialists as well as our two surgeons, and looking at the visual fields or the scans, OCT scans of the retina, we actually come up with a plan even prior to the surgical date where this have to be injected. So we say, we'll put 100 microliters in point A, 100 microliters in point B, and so forth. The third thing is that afterwards, so after the surgery, it takes, Jack can speak more to this, but it's not that you get everything back the next day, no way. Okay, so it's a process, and the second eye surgery is ideally done within a week or two after the first eye surgery. So the point is, almost all our patients have to actually do the second eye even before they start noticing any improvement in the first eye. That's interesting, right? It's not an easy decision to make. So we try to manage all the nitty-gritties, and once the surgery is over, it's about trying to make sure that we monitor outcomes, we monitor patients day to day, make sure there is no inflammation or any other complications, together with our surgical team members. So, I mean, although we do different roles, but it is all as a teamwork. And not to forget to mention that, all the experts, surgical and medical, we meet once in a while as a group, a Canadian group, as an advisory board, and try to share our experiences, trying to make the procedure better and safer for our patients.
Thank you. And that was a joke, but you're welcome to Montreal anytime if you want to join my team on a part-time basis. Okay. We won't fight it out on the stage here, but I think our team structure locally is a little bit different in the sense that it's not as big and as organized already. So my role, of course, is as a surgeon who administers the gene therapy, but I also fill in a lot of the gaps, not having a medical IRD specialist full-time with me. So I play some of that role as well. I do work closely with Dr. Robert Kunakoop, whom I'm sure many of you have heard, who also is very active and part of the FBC community. So the first patient from Quebec that we identified was actually a patient of his whom he had been following since the age of 3, and that he had diagnosed with RP65 and who had been waiting for this treatment. And this was the child, William, who just was very recently operated, was the first in the province of Quebec this past May. So that was the first Quebec patient that we've operated. And we're also now, with the experience that we've gained, are working towards treating our next patient coming up in just 2 weeks. It'll be our second one in October. And as we're saying, so it's also a team approach, and for all the roles that we don't have a specific full-time dedicated person for, I'm very grateful because I can gain a lot of insight and experience from Toronto, from Dr. Vincent and the team at Sick Kids, as well as Sunnybrook. And what I think is important and was a very interesting point raised was also the thought of expectation. And what I've started to bring on the team as well is we working through Saint-Justine Pediatric Hospital have access to services catered towards younger patients, because many of them are under the age of 18 when they first become identified and eligible. And basically, what I've also started to get involved are teams of psychologists, pediatric psychologists with whom I converse, and we have a preoperative assessment. Because I think hearing the patient perspective before, I think it's also very interesting, what are expectations, and also what does it mean to perhaps regain vision, and is this vision that's different from what's expected, and having had the opposite course in your visual outcome, what does it mean to start suddenly having more vision, and then is it going to continue? What step is it going to perhaps become stabilized? How does that change one's life in terms of school, work? I think those are all very important topics that need to be discussed pre-operation and also post, because also I think sometimes suddenly it's a whole new visual world and a lot of new information. So I think these are very interesting themes that we never had to really think about before, but that the gene therapy is setting this new way of thinking about how to deal with improved vision, which I think in the past, prior to gene therapy, I spoke a little bit about it this morning in the era where we were still using retinal prosthesis. When we explained and sat down with certain patients who had lost complete vision, when we talked about this possibility, some of them actually said, you know what, No, thank you. I've lived, with my vision this way for over 40 years. I'm very happy with the way I function. I run my own restaurant. I'm fully functional. I don't think I want to incorporate certain types of change. And this was the example I mentioned is someone who was in their late 70s, and he said, "I'm fully functional and I'm good the way I am." So I think it's important conversations to have. Gene therapy is an option, but it's really important to know about what it entails and the fact that it does have changes for the rest of a person's visual life. So those are important conversations to have as a team and to continue having after the surgery.
Absolutely. So, Jack, you've talked a little bit about how you'd found out about this procedure and it took quite a while before you got there. Obviously, a lot of advocacy on your part to make that happen as well. So how did it feel to actually go in and have that procedure, and how are you doing? We want to hear how that surgery has affected you.
Yeah, Dr. Vincent talking about managing expectations actually brought up some memories that I kind of forgot about in the process, because it was a lot. And so, at first I went in with very clear expectations of what I could expect from it. And I think the team at Sick Kids did a good job of setting my expectations sufficiently low so that I wasn't unpleasantly surprised by the outcome. And so I went into it knowing that I was going to be sedated for surgery, that it was a surgical procedure, that they were going to be, cutting up my eye and stuff like that. And in the back of my head, I was like, this is eye surgery. It's not heart surgery. Like, I'll bounce back in 2 days, I'll be fine. And so as part of the procedure, and this is me putting it in very layman's terms, so please correct me, other panelists, but as part of the procedure, they put like a air bubble in your eye. So when you wake up from surgery, they do one eye at a time. You really don't see much at all out of the eye that's been operated on. And so, the first day I had a patch on my eye to prevent it from being poked at and damaged and stuff like that. And I remember taking off the patch and being like, holy shit, I can hardly see a thing out of this eye. It's worse than before. And that was an expectation I had, but it was still kind of like a panicky moment where I was like, oh boy, what's going on here? And so for the first couple of days, it got a little bit better each day, but it was still like this nerve-wracking thing of what if it doesn't get back to where it was before? And, as Dr. Vincent said, the best opportunity is to space the two surgeries about 2 weeks apart. So I remember being in the room in the clinic with Dr. Vincent and Dr. Aon and being like, honestly, I'm a little scared to get the other eye done. I'm still not seeing the same as I was beforehand, right? And so it's like, okay, having it drop a little bit in one eye is fine, but what about both eyes? And so, we had a very long conversation about, my expectations and how it was happening, and, what I was experiencing was normal, and, what would be the decision criteria for me to choose to not have the second eye done or to delay that procedure. And, through that conversation and through the, excellent guidance of the healthcare team around me, I, was able to feel comfortable getting the second eye done. And, my vision did return in the right eye, and I did see the improvements. But it was a very challenging process. And so let's flip to the, positive side. What was the experience like after both eyes were done? As I said, it's a surgery. The recovery was a lot more than I expected. I would go for a walk and then need to nap for 2 hours for a couple, for some time to recover. But I remember starting to notice the changes, and the only word that I can think of to truly describe it is magical. I remember this is probably the moment I remember the most is I took a red pepper out of my fridge to chop up for a salad or something. And I remember being like, wow, that's really red. And I sat on my kitchen floor for at least 10 minutes just staring at this red pepper because I hadn't seen red as truly in so long. And, there were other experiences like that where, I've never been able to see in dim lighting. And I remember being, out walking around in the city and being like, wow, I can kind of see that person that's like 5 feet away from me. I don't really know what they look like, but I can actually kind of see them, which I couldn't before. And like just other things like that, like, oh, I dropped something on the floor, it's right there, and I hadn't been able to see like that in years. And like the improvements that I got were very minimal. My eyes were and still are very impacted by the disease, and so the improvements that I was likely to see were minimal, and they were, but they are still something. And it's hard to say long term what the future will hold. I'm hopeful that it will remain stable much longer because of the treatment. And it's been a really incredible experience that I'm very thankful for.
Your pepper story gave me goosebumps. Yeah, absolutely. So being mindful of time, as I am the timekeeper, and now I realize how hard it is to keep the time when you're actually up here. We could probably sit here and talk for hours about gene therapy and what other gene therapy treatments and things are going through clinical trials right now. But my last question to Dr. Qian and Dr. Vincent is there any particular research that's happening right now that you're most excited about or optimistic about?
So, if you're not optimistic as a retinal degeneration specialist, you cannot survive in this business. So we have to be optimistic. So there are a couple, I will be optimistic not just for gene therapy, any therapy for that matter, which can improve or at least stop the progression. So one very really promising gene replacement therapy, which is in phase 3 now, is for a specific type of X-linked retinitis pigmentosa. It's called, the gene name is RPGR. So they revealed their phase 1-2 results, which showed that the patients that were treated at low and medium level doses, they showed improvement in their function, their visual field, perimetry tests. So really excited for that. So phase 3 recruitment is now happening. So hopefully in 3 years. I'm really scared to give timelines because, patients clearly remember and they hold you to that. So about 3 years, we'll have the results of the phase 3, and hopefully if the results still hold good, hopefully that will go through the process. It is also important to note that there is a wide range of drugs, like repurposed drugs or new molecules which are being tried for, let's say, the commonest type being for Stargardt's disease. So there is a lot of one particular molecule called as ALK001. It now has a name called gilduretinol. They released their phase 1-2 results. It shows that patients who took this supplement or this drug, which is a synthetic form of vitamin A, it slowed the progression of the disease by 21%. So there is a lot of promise in various fields. The struggle now is to try to make the regulatory bodies like FDA understand that even slowing the progression of disease is actually a favorable outcome. So a lot of advocacy now has to go in that direction to try to get the regulatory agencies not to, take outcome measures from other diseases to retinal dystrophy, because this is not, retinal dystrophies are separate. It's not like other diseases that are out there. So There is a very good initiative from Foundation Fighting Blindness US. They're working closely with FDA to come up with guidelines. I think it's called READY is the name of the initiative, where they're trying to come up with guidelines which are specific for patients who have inherited retinal dystrophy. So overall, I would still say this is exciting times. Yes, you may have heard of some stories where it did not meet the outcome measure guidelines, but this were with outcome measures which the FDA was very strict at what they would accept as an outcome measure. So a lot of negotiations and like back and forth discussions are happening, and I guess that there is still a lot to look forward to.
Well, that was a great summary of upcoming therapies. So I'm not necessarily going to add on to that excellent list. And I think from my point of view, here we are talking to a crowd who was very interested and keen on IRDs. I think what's important to realize is that this is definitely making waves outside of ophthalmology as well. I mean, if you look at news, when people talk about the success stories in gene therapy, Luxturna and eye disease stands top of the list. So I think this is definitely good in terms of where we're going for future therapies, because this is drawing attention from the wider field of medicine, and also just in news about regaining vision and just health overall. For us, we're always working in this field. Ophthalmology is our world, but just like Jack said, people who are in cardiology or neurosurgery say, oh, the eye is a small organ. But I think the fact that we're able to say this is the first approved gene therapy whose molecule and mechanism is to reverse the gene mutation, that says something, and that's going to stay at first. We know of other gene therapies that are treating blood disorders like sickle cells or types of cancers. They don't necessarily target the same things. Those obviously have wider audience in terms of populations affected, but this is a very unique moment in history, and also for our field. And I think it's going to help move it forward. And I think just talking about optimism and hope, I feel like the patient that the first one that I operated, when I see him and kind of hearing Jack's story, that patient, within a week after his first eye was operated, he was playing soccer outdoors after 9 p.m. And he was saying, oh, well, this is fun. This is, first time I can keep goalie, and I was able to block the ball. And his dad was like, well, I cheated a bit, and I was kind of like, but they were, for them, that was like a great new finding. But I was floored because, we're learning as we go through that process as well. Every patient is different. I definitely wasn't expecting him to start seeing improvement after a week. So I think it's just stories from patients and following their progress that are really drivers and motivators for me to say, all this is worth it, and we want to push on and find new therapies.
So I have to admonish myself for going over time with this panel, but I want to close off with a question for Jack. Just to close out today, Jack, what does having access to Luxturna mean to you?
This is a question I thought a lot about before the panel, and in one word, hope. And so let me describe that. For me, it was always something that I was hopeful could impact my life and could impact others' lives. And I look at young people who have been treated by it and have seen much larger impacts. So, I'm hopeful for the future generations of blind and partially sighted people that they'll have easier access to treatment and not have to go through the same hurdles as I have. But I also know that all of this research takes a lot of work, and, there's so many variations of eye diseases that people are impacted by, and it's going to take time, and together we can make a difference. Fighting Blindness Canada is making a difference, and from my perspective, as someone who's benefited from sight-saving research, it just underscores to me how impactful donors of Fighting Blindness Canada are, how impactful physicians are, and that, together we can have hope for further treatments, and also acknowledge that while we're waiting for treatments, not to put our lives on hold, and continue to live meaningful lives as individuals with sight loss or blindness.
Well, I think that's the perfect note to end today's session on. I'm going to ask our panelists to stay up. I have one more job for you in a minute. But I just want you to come up here and say just a huge thank you to everyone in the room today. All of you who's given up your Saturday to be here with us, all of our incredible volunteers, our exhibitors, our sponsors. You've made this a really exciting, dynamic day, and I hope we've all learned a lot. I know I have, and made some new connections. I also want to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers. We're so grateful that you've been here volunteering your time to teach us about the research and the work you're doing, and just such great advice and stories. You inspire us to do what we do at Fighting Blindness Canada, so thank you so much. So bringing innovative sight-saving treatments to Canada is at the very core of our mission at Fighting Blindness Canada. It's why we're all doing what we do, and it's why we raise funds. Research, as Jack mentioned, is expensive. It's a long-term investment, but the results can be transformative, and we're seeing that today. If you're interested in learning more about supporting us, and I mean that in any way, volunteering, giving a gift, helping us raise awareness, our advocacy work, please talk to us. We have our FBC table right outside the doors to the ballroom. We have staff around. If you can't talk to us today, give us a call, email us. I can always be reached at education@fightingblindness.ca, and we would love to hear from you.